Learn the most useful Excel functions and formulas from Grant Huang.
In this video, I'm going to show you the top Excel formulas and functions that you need to know. And by the end of it, you'll be able to use formulas and functions with confidence, speed up your workflow, and finally stop second guessing which function to use. And to follow along, I've also included a workbook down below in the description. And I've also added a link to my free Excel shortcuts cheat sheet. If you want to save time and boost your productivity at work, I highly recommend that you grab it while you're there. Alright, with that being said, let's jump right in. To start off, let's talk about core formulas and functions fundamentals. Before we jump straight into functions, we need to talk about cell referencing. And there are two types of cell referencing that you need to know. They are relative referencing and absolute referencing. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use both. So let's take a look at our example. Let's say that we have a table with a list of fruits, the cost per fruit, and the number of fruits. And we're in charge of finding the total cost for each row. Well, to do this, we can simply use relative referencing to create a formula for the total cost column. Here's how. So, for the first total cost, we can simply multiply the cost per fruit by the number of fruits. So, let's go ahead and create a basic formula by typing an equal sign, and then we're going to relative reference the cost per fruit by selecting it, and then I'll type a multiplication sign, and then I'll relative reference the number of fruits by selecting it as well. No dollar signs, nothing needed. Press enter, and then go ahead and double click the fill handle or drag it down to apply that formula. And as you can see, as I double click on the formula, you'll notice that the cell references shift down because they are being relatively referenced. Now, sometimes you might not want to relative reference your values. Let me show you an example in which you would use absolute referencing. So, let's say that you want to find the total cost for these rows after shipping, and we have a standard flat shipping fee over here of $5, so I would basically just add the total cost to the shipping fee and display that for every single one of these cells. So let's go ahead and just use relative referencing and see what happens. Well, if I type an equal sign, select my total cost, and then type a plus sign, and then select my shipping fee cost, I can press enter and then double click the fill handle, and it might not look like anything's wrong, but if you double click on your formulas, you'll notice that this red box is shifting down, and again, that's because we relative referenced it. Now, if we wanted to lock it in over here so that when we step through our rows, it'll stay locked in, well, you need to absolute reference it, and here's how. It's very simple. So, after you relatively reference your value or your cell by clicking on it, you're going to go ahead and add dollar signs in front of the column letter and the row number. And you can manually do so, or you can simply use the shortcut F4 and it'll automatically add those for you. Then you can press enter and then you can double click the fill handle. And now as you step through these formulas, you'll notice that this red box doesn't shift at all because we've locked it in by using absolute referencing. Whereas this blue cell over here steps through each row one at a time because it's being relatively referenced, which we want in this case. And before we move on, I want to remind you that it's always a good idea to name your cells when you're using absolute referencing when you're working with others in order to make your formulas nice, presentable, and easy to read. So let's go ahead and redo this, and I'm going to press delete, and now let's name the cell C9 shipping fee by selecting it and then clicking on the name box over here, and then let's type shipping fee. And remember, there are no spaces allowed, so I'll do it like this, press enter, and now let's recreate our formula. I'll type an equal sign, relative reference my total cost, add the shipping fee over here, and you'll notice it says shipping fee instead of that actual C9, which makes it easier to read. Then I can press enter and then double click the fill handle, and anytime you name your cells, it automatically absolute references it. So that's perfect right there. And if you want to take it a step further and name the other cells over here, you don't have to do so manually one at a time, because you can simply turn it into a structured table, and then all of the cells will be named after their column headers. See, if I click inside my table, press Ctrl T, and then click OK to turn it into a structured table, I can go ahead and fix my formatting by going to the Table Design tab. I'll click on More Options here and select this blank one, and then I'll click on the Filter button to get rid of those drop down arrows, and now watch what happens when I recreate this formula. I'll type equals, I'll select it, and now it says total cost, so it's even easier to read now. So I can go ahead and add the shipping fee, and boom, press enter, it automatically fills all my formulas because again, that's what structured tables do for you. So now you know how to use relative referencing and absolute referencing in Excel, as well as how to name your cells in order to keep your formulas nice, presentable, and easy to understand and read. Functions play a key role in Excel, and knowing how to use them can make your job so much easier and save you a ton of time. So in this video, I'm going to show you what a function is and how you can use it. So a function is a built-in Excel formula that takes in arguments, calculates them, and then outputs a desired result. And all functions are made of three parts. Number one, the equal sign. Number two, the function name. And then number three, the arguments that go inside a set of parentheses. So this is what goes inside of your function. Now let's do an example with the most basic function in Excel, the sum function. Now, let's say that we have these four tables here, and first, we're in charge of finding the row and column totals of the table for Q1. Well, to do this, I could create my own formula by typing an equal sign, and then relatively referencing each value by clicking on them, typing a plus sign, clicking, typing a plus sign, and doing this over and over again, and then clicking and dragging my fill handle, or I can just simply use a function. Here's how. First, type the first part, which would be an equal sign, then type the function name, ours would be sum, and by the way, if you forget the entire name of a function, you can just type the first few letters, and then you'll get a list of suggested functions, and then you can double click the one that you want. In our case, it would be the sum function, so I'll double click there, and then we want to make sure that open parentheses bracket is there, and then we can type in our arguments, what goes inside the function. And what's great about Excel is it'll give you a list of suggested arguments. As you can see, number one, number two, so you don't have to guess what goes in every single function. So from this over here, I know that I can simply insert one argument at a time or one cell reference at a time and separate them by commas. So I could select my first value here, type a comma, select my next one, type a comma, and select my last one, and then close it off and then press enter. Or what I could do is whenever you have a list of suggested arguments that say number one, number two, number three, or value one, value two, value three, that's separated by commas, you can just simply select the entire range and it'll automatically add those up for you. So I can close off the parentheses and press enter, and there you go. Now I can double click the fill handle and it automatically fills that over there. And I can do the same thing for my column totals. I'll type in equal sign for this empty cell, and then I'll type the function name, remember that sum, and open parentheses, and then I can select my range over here, and then I can close off the parentheses and press enter. Now I can go ahead and click and drag the fill handle to the right to apply that function over to the right hand side as well. Now, quick pro tip, if you don't want to do this over and over again for multiple tables, you can actually auto sum all of your column and row totals at once by selecting your table. So I'll select the first one, then hold control, and then select your other tables so that you can select all the ranges at once. Then you can let go of the control key and press the shortcut Alt equals. This will automatically sum all of your blank cells for you. Now, this shortcut only works for Windows, so if you have a Mac, here's what you can do instead. I'll press Ctrl Z, and you're gonna leave all your ranges selected, then you're gonna go to the Formulas tab, and then you can click on the Auto Sum button over here, this command. Once you do that, it does the same thing, it auto sums all of your blank cells for you. And what's cool about this is, even on Windows 2, I'll go ahead and press Ctrl Z to undo, you have more options. You can automatically find all the averages, the counts, the max, and the minimums of these values. See, for example, if I want to find the averages of all of these column and row totals, I can click on average, and that'll automatically find and input that average function for me. Now, before we move on, I wanted to mention that if you want to learn more functions, you can go to the Formulas tab and then go to the function library over here. And in this section, you can click on any of these commands. If you click on financial, you'll see a bunch of different financial functions. Logical, you'll see logical functions, text functions, date and time, lookup, math and trig, and there's more functions over here if you want. And then if there's a specific function you want to learn about, once you see it, you can literally just click on it, and then you'll get a pop-up where you can learn what the function does and what arguments you need in order to use that function. I'll go ahead and exit out of that. And now you know what a function is, the three parts that make every single function, and you also now know how to auto-sum multiple blank cells instantly by using the shortcut Alt equals. Before we move on, I want to show you two quick tips. If you go to the Formulas tab, you can auto sum your values by using this button here, or you can auto average your values, count the numbers, find the max or min. For example, if this cell is selected and I click on count numbers, it'll automatically pull the count function and I can press enter and it'll count the number of values that I have. Also, if you want to learn a function, in the Formulas tab, you can click on any of these groups and it'll display a list of functions under that group, and all you have to do is click on it and then you can learn about the arguments, what it does, and that way you can learn new functions if you need to. Alright, those are two quick tips. Now let's move on. Now, for the rest of this module, we'll be going over a ton of useful functions, and I know that it can be a little hard trying to remember them at first, so I created an ultimate guide with a list of all the functions and their uses. You can grab it underneath this video and use it as a reference guide until you don't need one anymore. And as we go through each function, make sure to pause the videos and then try out those functions yourself inside of the practical workbook. Alright, let's jump right in. In this video, I'm going to show you 4 text functions that you can use to clean your text fast. The first one is the trim function, and you can use it to fix your spacing. For example, you'll notice that we have a lot of extra spacing in between our first and last names. Well, if we want to fix the spacing, we don't have to manually do so. Instead, we can use our function by typing an equal sign, then type our function name trim, and then type an open parentheses, and we only have one argument here, the text, so we can select that text, close it off, and then press enter, and that automatically gets rid of that extra spacing between your first and last names. And you can double click the fill handle and it'll automatically apply it to the rest of these values because we relative reference that value. Now let's take a look at the next function, the proper function, and you can use this to fix your cases. So for example, you'll notice that our capitalization has a bunch of errors. So if you want to fix it so that it only capitalizes the first letter of the first word and then the first letter of the second word like a typical name, well, you can just type an equal sign, then type your function name, so that would be proper, and then type an open parentheses, and then same thing for the argument. We'll select our value, close it off, press enter, and then double click the fill handle. So that automatically fixes all of your capitalization errors. Now, let's move on to the upper function, which is the next one, and this just turns all of your text into uppercase. See, for example, if I type in equals, upper, and then the open parentheses, select my cell again, close it off, press enter, double click the fill handle, and that automatically uppercases all my values. Now if I want to do the opposite, I can use the lower function. So I'll type an equal sign, type lower, open parentheses, select my reference, and then close it off, press enter, and then that's the same thing, right? It automatically lower cases all of your letters. So now you know how to use these 4 text functions to clean your text fast in Excel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the TEXTJOIN function to combine multiple values in Excel efficiently. But first, I want to show you the manual way of combining values, and that's by using the ampersand. For example, let's say that I have a list of first names and last names over here, and I want to combine them into a list of full names. Well, I can do this by typing an equal sign and then referencing my first value, and then I can type the ampersand, and then I'll select my next value to reference it, and then I can press enter, and that automatically combines both of my values in this cell. Now, you'll notice that there isn't a space in between them, and that's because you have to manually add it. And I can do so by entering a quote space quote after the first ampersand, and then add another ampersand so that it combines this value with the space and then this value. So I'll press enter, and then that's how you can manually combine your values by using the ampersand sign. Now, whenever you want to combine multiple values in multiple columns, that could take a lot of time. So in those cases, you're going to want to use the TEXTJOIN function. Let me show you an example. So let's say that we want to combine the first name, last name, age, gender, state, and occupation all into one column. Well, to do this, I can simply type an equal sign and then type my function name. So that would be TEXTJOIN, and then type an open parentheses. And now let's insert our arguments. The first one, it suggests our delimiter, and the delimiter is what separates the values in your cell. And in our case, we want to separate our values by a comma and a space, as you can see over here. So I'll go ahead and type a quote, comma, space, and then quote. Now I'll type another comma, and then for our next argument, we want to ignore our empty cells. So we're going to go ahead and type true. so I'll type true and then type another comma, and then for text 1, text 2, text 3, remember you can go ahead and select your first value, type a comma, select your next one, and so on, or you can just simply select all of your values at once in a range like so, close it off, and then press enter. Now you can double click the fill handle, and there you go. It automatically combines all of your values into this one singular column by using the TEXTJOIN function. Alright, now let's do a quick recap. In the TEXTJOIN function, we have 3 arguments. Our first one is our delimiter. This is what we want to separate our values by in our new column. The second argument, we wrote true because we want to ignore our empty cells. And then for the third argument, we just selected the range that contained all the values that we wanted to combine into that one cell. Alright, now you know how to use the TEXTJOIN function to combine values in Excel efficiently. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use 8 statistical functions to analyze your data fast. So first, let's take a look at our table. We have a list of names, and then we have a list of their corresponding weights. Now, let's say that we're in charge of identifying these statistical metrics for this range of weights. To do this, we can simply use a function for every single one of these metrics. For example, if we want to find the average, we can use the average function. So I can type an equal sign, then type average for the function name, type in open parentheses, and then for the suggested arguments, you'll see number 1, comma, number 2. Again, that means I can select my range like so, and then close it off and press enter. There you go. This function automatically calculates the average for you. Now, we can do the same thing for the median. We could go ahead, type equal, and then we'll type the function median for the name, then in open parentheses, select the same range, and then close it off and press enter. There you go. That's the median. Now, before we move on, I want to show you a quick pro tip. If you find yourself referencing the same range over and over again, whether you're doing a function or a formula, you can name it first, and then that makes it easier and quicker to reference that same exact range. Let me show you what I mean. So you'll notice that we have to keep referencing this range of weights. So let's go ahead and name that range first. So we can do this by selecting it, and then going to the name box, I'll click on it, name it whatever you want, I'll type a W just to keep it short, then press enter, and now this range is called W. So whenever we want to reference it, we could just type equals, and then we can type W, and it automatically references that range. Let me show you how that makes everything faster. So let's find the mode of this range. To do this, I can type equals, and then the mode function would be mode, open parentheses, and now I don't have to manually select my range. I can instead just type W, close it off, and press enter, and that automatically references the range and finds the mode of that range for me. I can do the same thing for the maximum by typing equals max parentheses W, close it off, press enter. Much faster. Same thing for minimum, I'll type equals min W, close it off, press enter. Very, very fast. And for the standard deviation, you can use the function stdev.s, and the .s means that you're taking the standard deviation of the sample. If you're working with a population, which most likely you'll never be doing that, it would be .p. So I'll keep .s, open parentheses, W, close it off, press enter. Let's do the same thing for the variance. It would be equals var.s. Again, that .s means sample. If you're dealing with the population, it would be .p. Open parentheses, W, close it off, and press enter. Now, this statistical function is a little bit different, the quartile function. So let's say that we want to find Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4 of your range. Well, to do this, for example, let's do Q3. You could just type equals, and then I'll type quartile. For the function name, an open parentheses, and then for array, you can select your range. Again, we could just type W because we've already named that range. I'll type a comma, and if you want to display Q1, you would type 1, Q2, you would type 2, 3, 4, and so on. So in this case, we want to find Q3, so I'll type 3, close it off, and press enter, and there you go. Now, let's move on to the final metric we want to find, which is the count, the number of weights in the sample. Well, in order to do this, I actually don't even need a function at all. I could simply just select my range like I've done so now, and then I can navigate to the bottom right corner of Excel over here where it says average, count, and sum. This is called the status bar, and it displays certain statistical metrics for you without having to type a single function at all. See, I can see the average, count, and sum already, and what's cool about it is, since I wanted to find the count, I can simply just click on the count here, and then paste it by clicking on a cell and pressing Ctrl V. And if you don't see the count, or you want to see some of different values in the status bar, you can simply select the range, and then once you see your values pop up, you can right click on the status bar, and then you can select any of the ones you want to add. For example, if I want to add maximum, I can click maximum, minimum. Let's see what happens when I add minimum. Now I can see the minimum of my selected range. See, I select this, it says 96, and we could check it with the function 96 over there. So now you know how to use statistical functions in Excel to analyze your data efficiently, as well as how to name your ranges in order to reference those ranges much faster. In this video, I'm going to show you two mathematical functions that you need to know. The first one is the abs function, and you can use it to find the absolute value or the positive difference between two values. So for example, let's say that I have a table for the sales over here, and we're in charge of finding the positive difference between the actual and predicted sales for every single row. Well, to do this, I can simply type in equal sign, then type my function name abs for abs, then type in open parentheses, and then for my argument, I'm going to insert my number. So if it's -10, I'll insert -10 and it'll give me +10. In our case, we'll simply insert our formula by selecting our first actual sales, and then we'll subtract, so type minus, and then select our first predicted sales, so we'll relative reference both of those values, close it off with the parentheses, and press enter. Then I can double click my fill handle, and it automatically calculates all the positive differences for every single row. Alright, next function, the sum product function. Let me show you how to use this. So let's say that you're in charge of doing inventory for a school, and you want to find the total cost for every single item, given the cost per item and the number of item bought. Well, instead of creating a formula to find the total cost by referencing the cost per item and multiplying it by the number bought and then closing it off and then pressing enter and then finally adding all of those values together by using the sum function, which can take a lot of time if you have a lot of values, you can skip the first part and jump straight into the sum product function. So I'll type in equals, then I'll type sum product, and then I'll type in open parentheses. And for the first argument, we're going to select our first array. This would be the list of cost per items. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the next argument, I'll select my next array, which would be the number bought. Then I could go ahead and just press enter, and it'll automatically calculate the value for me. Now, let's do a quick recap so that you understand this function. So what happened was we had two arguments that went inside the sum product function because we had two columns. If we wanted to multiply multiple columns and add them together, then we would have to have more arrays, more arguments. So what happens in our case is it takes the first value in the first column, and then it multiplies by the first value in the second column, so 50 times 7, and then it'll do that for every single one of these rows, and then it'll automatically add those values for us, which is why we didn't have to manually find the total cost and then add them. This function does it all by itself. So now you know how to use two essential mathematical functions to find the positive differences between your values, as well as how to quickly multiply and then add up your values in Excel. If you want to round your values in Excel, you need to know how to use these three functions. Number one, the round function, and you can use this function to round your number to whatever decimal place you want. For example, let's say that we want to round this value to the first decimal place. To do this, I'll type an equal sign, and then I'll type my function name round, open parentheses, and then I'll select my number for the first argument, type a comma, and then for the number of digits, I'll type a 1 to specify that I want to round to the first decimal place, press enter, and that's it. Now, second function, you can use the ceiling function to round up your number to the nearest interval of whatever number you want. In our case, let's say that we want to round this number up to the nearest interval of 5. So this would be 75, right? 75, 80, 85, 90, and so on. So to do this, I'm going to type an equal sign and then type my function name, which would be ceiling, type an open parentheses. Again, for the number, I'll select my value, type a comma, and for the significance, I'll type 5, and then you can close it off and then press enter. There you go. It rounds up to 75. Now, the last function is the floor function, and you can use it to round your number down to the nearest interval of whatever number you want again. For example, I can round down to the nearest interval of 5, and so it would go down to 70, right? It would go 70, 65, 60, and so on. So let's go ahead and type our function. So I'll type an equal sign, then I'll type the function name floor, and then for the first argument, I'll select my number, type a comma, and then for the significance, again, type 5, so same arguments. Then I'll press enter after I close it off, and there you go, it rounds down to 70. So now you know how to use these three functions to round your values in Excel. Alright, now let's move on to advanced logical and conditional functions. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use 4 logical functions to test whether or not certain conditions are true or false. And don't forget to pause the video after we cover each of these 4 functions and then test each function in the practical workbook yourself. The first logical function is the if function, and here's how to use it. So let's say that we have a list of items and then we have their actual sales and their expected sales, and we want to figure out if their sales expectation was met. So if the actual sales was larger than or equal to the expected sales, then we would write yes. If it wasn't, then we would write no. Now to do this, we can use the if function. Here's how. First, we'll type an equal sign, then type the if for the function name, then I'll type in open parentheses, and then for the first argument, I'm going to insert my logical test. This is the condition that I want to test. In our case, we want to make sure whether or not the actual sales is greater than or equal to the expected sales. Now to do this, we can reference the actual sales, and then type the greater than sign, then an equal to, so this means greater than or equal to, and then select the expected sales. Alright, so that's the condition we want to test. Then I'll type a comma, and then we're going to specify what we want to display in case this condition is met, in case it's true, right? And so let's go ahead and type yes in case this condition is true. So I'll type a quote, yes, quote, and then we'll type a comma, and then if this condition is not true, so the expected sales are actually greater than the actual sales, then we need to type no. So I'll type quote, and then I'll type no, quote, close it off, and then I can press enter. Then I can go ahead and double click my fill handle, and that's how to use the if function to test conditions in Excel and then display whatever value you want to display based on whether or not that condition was met. For example, since the actual sales was indeed larger than the expected sales for the first row, it displayed yes. Now it displayed no because in this case the expected sales was larger than the actual sales. Alright, let's move on to the next function, the OR function. And you can use the OR function to test if at least one of multiple conditions is true or false. So for example, if we want to answer the question, did at least one item meet the expected sales, we could go ahead and use the OR function. Here's how. Type an equal sign, then type the OR function, then type an open parentheses, and then we're just going to insert one condition at a time. So let's go ahead and insert and test our first condition, which would be if the first row's actual sales is greater than or equal to the expected sales. Alright, then I'll type a comma, and then we'll do the same thing for the next one. Actual sales is greater than or equal to the expected sales, type a comma, and then for the third argument, we'll do the third test, the third condition, so I'll select the actual sales is greater than or equal to the expected sales, and then I can close it off after I've inserted all 3 conditions that I want to test, and if I press enter and it says true, that means at least one of these conditions was met. So I'll press enter, and it says true because, as you saw before, at least one of these rows said yes because the actual sales was indeed larger than or equal to the expected sales. Now, if none of them were met, then this would say false. Now, let's move on to the next function, which is the AND function, and you can use the AND function to test if all the conditions are met, not just 1 or 2, all of them are met. So if we want to figure out did all items meet expected sales, we can go ahead and type an equal sign and then type AND for the function name, open parentheses, and then same thing, we're going to insert all 3 of our conditions. And actually I can make this faster by copying the arguments in my previous function. I'll press Ctrl C, and then I'll type AND parentheses, paste it by pressing Ctrl V, closing it off, and then press enter. So if all of them were met, so all of them were true, then it would say true. If at least one of the conditions was not met, then it would say false. So I'll press enter, and it says false because these 2 were actually not met. So this is perfectly right. Now, let's move on to the last function, which is the NOT function. And this function basically takes the true or false and then inverts it. So if your answer is true, it'll turn it false. If it's false, it'll turn true. For example, the question here is, did all items not meet expected sales? So it's the exact opposite of this question. Well, in order to answer this, we can simply type equals not, type an open parentheses, and just select this cell over here for our argument, close it off, and press enter. So that false turns into true, and if it were true, it would turn to false. Alright, now you know how to use 4 logical functions in Excel to test multiple conditions to see whether certain ones were met or not. If you want to test multiple conditions in Excel and then display a specific value based on which condition is met, then you need to use the IFS function if you want to do it efficiently. Here's how. So let's say that we have a table over here with a list of names and survey responses, and we're in charge of filling the number column with the specific number based on the survey response. So for example, if it's disagree over here, then I want to return the number 1. So I'll type 1 here. And then if it says neutral, then I want to display the number 2. If it says agree, I want to display the number 3. Now to do this, instead of manually typing out every single one, I can use the IFS function instead. Here's how. First, type an equal sign, then type your name IFS for the function, then type an open parentheses, and then for the first argument, I'm going to insert the first condition that I want to test. So I want to test if this value over here, so I'll select it, is equal to this one over here. So I'm going to select this value over here and say if it is equal to, and then I'll select here, disagree in this table, then I'll type a comma, and then I'm going to select the number 1, because this is what I want to return in case this condition is met. Alright, then I'll type a comma, and then I'll repeat the same process for every single condition. So for the next condition, I want to test if this value over here is equal to neutral. Alright, and if it is, I'll type a comma, and then I want to return the number 2, so I'll select 2. Alright, I'll type another comma, and then again, the next condition I want to test is this value, so I'll select it, equal to agree. If it is, I'll type a comma, and then return the number 3, so I'll select 3. Now I'll go ahead and close it off, press enter, and now whenever you double click it, you'll notice that there are NA errors. And that's because, as you can see, when we double click, these values are shifting down because we've relatively referenced them. So in order to fix this, all we need to do is absolute reference the correct values. And the values we need to absolute reference are these over here. So anytime we're referencing these, we need to add those dollar signs. But at the same time, we can relative reference this blue cell over here because we want to step down these values. So I'm basically going to add dollar signs to the cells that aren't blue. So this red one over here, I could go ahead and press F4 again as the shortcut. F4 over here, F4 here, F4 here, F4 here, and F4 here. So I'll leave these blue cells relatively referenced, but these are all locked in now. And I can go ahead and press enter, and then I can double click the fill handle, and that's it. It automatically applies and automatically attributes the specific number based on the survey response given this table over here. And quick pro tip, if you ever double click the fill handle to drag a function or formula down and you notice that your formatting changes, well, after you drag your function or formula down, you'll get this icon on the bottom right corner. You could just click on it and then click on fill without formatting, and that'll automatically fix your formatting back to the original one without changing the formula or function you've just inserted. Now, before we move on, let's do a quick recap of this function. Now, when you double click, you'll see all the arguments, and it might seem overwhelming, but the structure is actually very simple. You start with the condition you want to test, and then you specify the value you want to return if that condition is met. Then you have the next condition you want to test, and then the value you want to display for that condition, and then you have the next condition you want to test, and then the value you want to display if that condition is met, and it keeps going on and on. So it goes condition, and then value you want to return if condition is true, and then it goes another condition, and then same thing, what you want to display or return in case that value is true. And so for our conditions, we simply tested if this cell over here was equal to disagree. If it's equal to disagree, then we wanted to display the number 1, which is why we referenced that purple cell over there. The next condition was if this cell is equal to neutral, then we wanted to display the number 2. The next one was if this cell is equal to agree, then we wanted to display the number 3. So again, that's how to use the IFS function to test multiple conditions in Excel. Counting might seem like a simple thing to do, but if you use the wrong counting function, you could end up getting the wrong number without even knowing. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 counting functions you need to know and how to use them properly. So the first one is the count function, and you can use it to count the number of cells containing only numbers. So for example, we have the total hours column over here, and if we only want to count the number of cells containing numbers, not the letters, so missing, pending, none of that counts, counts, then here's what we can do. We could type an equal sign, and then type the function count, and then type in open parentheses, and then we can select our column by hovering over here since it's a structured table and clicking. Then I can close it off and then press enter. And that automatically counts the cells containing only numbers in that column. Alright, let's move on to the next function, the COUNTA function. And you can use it to count the number of non-blank cells in your column. For example, in this column, if I wanted to count the number of cells that contains both numbers, letters, or either one, as long as they're not empty, I want to count them, then here's what I can do. I can click inside my cell, type an equal sign, and then type count A, type in open parentheses, and then select my column by hovering and then clicking on the header like that, close it off, and then press enter. And there you go. That's how to count all of the non-blanks, so both numbers and letters are okay in your column. So let's move on to the next one, which is count blank. And this one is very straightforward. You can use it to count the number of blank cells in your column. So this would be one over here. And to do this, I can type equals count blank, open parentheses, and then select my range again. I'll click at the top, and then I'll close it off and press enter. There you go. So I can tell that there are 2 blank cells in this column. Okay, number 4. This is actually a combination of 2 functions. So if you want to figure out how many cells in this column contain only letters, there's not a function for that. You actually have to create a formula by using 2 functions to do this. Here's how. First, type equals, and then you're going to want to use the COUNTA function to count the total number of non-blanks. So that's both letters and numbers combined. So I can type count A and then select my column over here, close it off, and then we're going to subtract by the count function because we want to find the cells that only contain letters. So if we find the total number of cells containing both letters and numbers, and then we subtract that by the cells that contain only numbers, we're left with the cells that only contain letters. So that's how this formula works. So I could go ahead and select my column over here. Again, this count is going to count the number of cells that only contain numbers. So again, it's numbers and letters minus numbers equals letters. There you go. Alright, let's move on to the 5th function, which is COUNTIF, and you can use it to count the number of cells that contain a specific value. For example, if I want to count the number of cells in this column that contain the word pending, then I can type equals, then I'll type the function COUNTIF, open parentheses, then for the first argument, I'll select my range. So I'll hover over here, click on it to select it, type a comma, and then I'll specify my criteria. I'll type a quote, then type the word pending, type another quote, close it off, and then press enter. And now from this, I can see that only one of the cells in this column contains the word pending, and here it is. So now you know how to use all the right counting functions in Excel so that you can count your values without getting inaccurate results. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the COUNTBLANK function to remove blank rows in Excel efficiently. Here's how. So let's say that we have a table over here and we have some complete blank rows like this, and we also have some partial blank rows like that where only a few cells in the row are blank. Well, if we want to remove the complete blank rows and the partial or either one, we need to first create a new column in our table. To do this, I'm going to click over here and then I'll name it index and then press enter. So now we have our new column, and inside this column we need to display the number of blank cells in every single row. So since this one has none, it would say 0. This one has 7 blank rows because there are 7 columns over here, so it would say 7. And to do this, instead of manually typing them out, we could just type equals, use our function COUNTBLANK, type in open parentheses, select our first row, close it off, and press enter. And since it's a structured table, our function will automatically apply to each and every single row. Alright, so we have some that say 0. This basically means that the row has no blanks. We have some that say 7, which means it's a complete blank row. And then if it has between 1 and 6, that just means that it's a partial blank row because it has a few blank rows. This one has 3. Now, let's go ahead and remove all the partial blank rows in this table by filtering it by the index column. So here's how to remove all the partial blank rows. Just click on the filter drop-down arrow under the index column and then go ahead and unselect all. Then we would only want to display the rows that either have 0 blank cells or they have 7 blank cells. So they're completely blank or they're completely filled. All the partial blanks will be unselected, and so if I click OK, that removes all the partially blank rows, leaving us with only the complete rows and the complete blank rows. And now you can go ahead and copy this table by pressing Ctrl A twice, pressing Ctrl C, and then you can literally go anywhere you want, paste it by pressing Ctrl V, and by doing this, it will only display the visible rows in this original table. Alright, I'll press Ctrl Z for now, and then let's go ahead and undo this filter. So I'll select all again and click OK, and now let's try removing only the complete blank rows in this table by doing the same thing. We're going to filter the index column. Now, if I want to remove only the complete blank rows, then we want to get rid of the 7, because if it has 7 blanks, that means it's a complete blank row. So I'll uncheck that, and then I'll click OK, and there you go. Now that's how to remove all your complete blank rows in the table. Now, finally, if you want to remove both partial and complete blank rows, then we need to unselect everything and then select 0, because only when this column is equal to 0 are all the cells filled. So I'll click OK, and all of this means that there are 0 blank cells in each row, and now I've successfully removed all of my partial and complete rows in this table. Alright, so now you know how to use the COUNTBLANK function to remove your partial, complete, and both complete and partial blank rows in Excel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use 3 super useful conditional functions to analyze your data more efficiently in Excel. Before we jump right in, quick tour of this worksheet. We have a table with a list of employee names, their IDs, departments, years of experience, and their salaries. Now, let's start with the first conditional function, maxIfs, and you can use this to find the maximum value in a specific column based on at least one criteria. So you can have 1, 2, 3, or multiple. Now, let's take a look at our example. We want to figure out what the highest paid accountant's salary is by using this function. So we know that we want to find the maximum salary given the specific condition that they are an accountant. Alright, to do this, we'll start by typing an equal sign, then I'll type our function name, maxifs, open parentheses, and then for the first argument, the max range, we're just going to select the column that contains our desired output. In our case, we wanted to display the salary, so I'll select the salary column by hovering over the header and clicking when I see the arrow. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the second argument, we're going to select our criteria range 1. So this is just the range that contains your specified criteria. In our case, we wanted to specify that they are an accountant, and so we would be working with the department column. So I'll select the department column for the criteria range because it has the word accounting. Speaking of which, once you type a comma for the third argument, you'll specify your criteria. In our case, we want them to be working in the accounting department. So we're going to go ahead and type a quote and type accounting in it, close it off, close parentheses, and then press enter. Once you do that, Excel will automatically calculate the highest paid accountant salary for you. Alright, quick recap. So in the maxifs function, we have 3 arguments. You can have more if you have multiple criterias, but in our case we had 1. So first we had the max range, and this is just the range that contains your desired output. We wanted the salary, so we selected the salary column. The second argument was your first criteria range. So since our criteria was that the employee had to be an accountant, we selected the department column. And then for the third argument, we specified our actual criteria by typing accounting in quotes. Alright, let's move on to the next function, which is minifs, and you can use it to do the opposite. You can find the minimum value in a specific column based on at least one criteria. So, for example, we want to find the lowest paid engineer salary given that they have less than 5 years of experience. So, we want to find the minimum salary based on 2 criteria. One is that they have to be an engineer, right? And the other one is that they have to have less than 5 years of experience. Let's take a look at how this function works. So I'll start by typing an equal sign, then I'll type my function name, minifs, type an open parentheses, and then instead of max range, it says min range. This is the same thing. We're going to select the range that contains our desired output. We wanted to display the salary, so I'll select the salary column again. Type a comma, and for the next argument, we're going to select the range where our first criteria is located. Let's go ahead and start with the engineer criteria. So we know that engineer is in the department column because we have to specify their engineering. So I'll select it for that argument, type a comma, and then this is where we have to specify that criteria, remember? So I'm going to go ahead and type quote and engineering, close off the quote, type a comma, and then since we have another criteria, we're going to have two more arguments. One to select the criteria range for that criteria. In this case, since the criteria is that they have less than 5 years of experience, we're going to select the column that contains years of experience. Then we'll type a comma, and then for the final argument, we're going to specify the criteria for that range. So in our case, that's that they have less than 5 years of experience, and to write that out, it's very simple. You would just type a quote and write the less than sign, and then type 5, and then close it off with another quote, and then you can close off this whole function with a parenthesis. Then once you do that, just press enter, and then Excel will automatically calculate the lowest paid engineer salary given that they have less than 5 years of experience. You don't have to filter this table, you don't have to sort it or manually look through anything like that. It's much faster just to use a function like min-ifs. Alright, quick recap. So in the min-ifs function, we actually had 5 arguments since we had 2 criteria. The first argument was the same. We selected the column that contained our desired output, which was the salary column. Then for the second argument, we specified our first criteria range. In this case, we selected the department column because we wanted to specify that they were an engineer. So for the third argument, we specified that they were an engineer by typing the word engineer in quotes. Then for our next argument, we selected the second criteria range. So in our case, we selected the years of experience column because we wanted to specify that they had less than 5 years of experience. And that's where the last argument comes in. We specified that criteria by typing a quote, less than 5, quote. Now, if you wanted to change it, for example, say have more than 5 years of experience, you would just flip this around, of course, where it says more than. You can do more than or equal to, and you can also change the number. For example, this would say that they have at least 10 years of experience. But in our case, we wanted that to be less than 5 years of experience. So I'll leave it like that. Alright, let's move on to the third function, which is SUMIFS. And you can use this function to find the total value in a specific column based on at least one criteria. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our example. In this case, we want to figure out what the total salary of all the professionals that have employee IDs that end in 1. So we know we want to output the salary, and we know that there's one condition, and that's that their ID ends in the number 1. So let's go ahead and write this function. I'll type an equal sign, and then I'll type SUMIFS, and then type in open parentheses, and then for the sum range, again, we're going to select the range that contains our desired output. So I'll go ahead and select the salary column because that's what we want to output. Then I'll type a comma, and then for our second argument, we're going to select our first criteria range, or only in this case. And since the criteria is that the employee ID must end in the number 1, we can go ahead and select the employee ID column over here, then type a comma. Next argument, we're going to specify our criteria. Since ours is that the employee ID ends in the number 1. So to do this, we actually have to use something called a wildcard, which is basically an asterisk. Let me show you how to do this. So if we want to say that the value here ends in the number 1, we would type a quote and then type an asterisk 1 and close off the quote. So this basically says that the value ends in 1. Now, if we wanted to say that it begins with 1, we would move this asterisk, aka the wildcard, over to the right hand side of the 1 like so. So this would mean that the employee ID starts with the number 1. Now, if we wanted to say that it contains a 1 in the middle somewhere, then we would just have to add another asterisk in between the 1 like so. Now, in our case, we wanted to say that it ends in 1, so we'll just keep it in the front, and then I can go ahead and close off this function, and then press enter, and there you go. That automatically adds up all of the salaries of the professionals, given that their employee IDs end in the number 1. Now, quick recap. So, in this function, we have 3 arguments, since we only have 1 criteria. We started with the first argument, the sum range, which was just the range that contained our desired output, our salary, and then for the second argument, we selected our criteria range. This would be the employee ID column because we wanted to specify that it had to end in the number 1, which brings me to the third argument, the actual criteria. You have to specify using a wildcard that the ID ends in the number 1. So now you know how to use 3 super useful conditional functions to analyze your data more efficiently in Excel. Alright, now let's finish this off with lookup functions for data retrieval. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use VLOOKUP to look up values in your tables efficiently. And I want to clarify that there are two types of lookups that you can do with VLOOKUP. The first one is an exact match, and the second one is an approximate match. And in this video, we'll be doing an exact match. So let's say that we have this table over here with a list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experiences, and their salaries. And we're in charge of doing two things. First, we want to use VLOOKUP to look up the departments that each employee works in, and then we'll use VLOOKUP to look up the years of experience for these given employee names. Now, instead of manually going through the table, looking for Ahmed Lam, and then trying to find their department, copy and pasting over here, and then finding their years of experience, copy and pasting like so, which can take a lot of time, especially if you have a lot of rows, you can simply just use VLOOKUP. Here's how. First, let's do the department column. We'll type an equal sign, then type the function VLOOKUP, type an open parentheses, and then for the first argument, we're going to select our lookup value. This would be the first employee name because that's what we're looking up inside of our table over here. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the second argument, we're going to select our table array. This is just the entire table in which you're looking up your value in. So I could go ahead and click on the top left cell over here, press Ctrl Shift right arrow and down arrow, and then press Ctrl backspace to go back up. Now, it's super important that when you're using any type of lookup function that you need to absolute reference when you select your ranges and your columns. And in this case, we selected a big range, our table, so we need to press F4. That way, as we drag the function down, this table won't shift down to the blank cells. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the next argument, we're going to type our column index number. And this is just the number of the column in which your desired output is in. In our case, we want to output the department, and that is in column 1, 2, 3. And so I would write the number 3. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the next argument, I'll type a false to do an exact match. That just means that I'm looking up the name Ahmed Lam, right? Not Ahmed Lams with the S or anything else like that. It has to be exact names in this lookup. Then I'll close this function off and then press enter. Then double click the fill handle, and that's it. Once you do that, VLOOKUP will automatically look up the departments for these given employee names for you. So it's super efficient. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the years of experience, except this time we'll be using a structured table, which means that we don't have to manually absolute reference our ranges and columns. Let me show you what I mean. First, let's turn this table into a structured one by clicking inside, pressing Ctrl T, and then clicking OK. Then once you do that, I'm just going to click over here to change the style to make it consistent. And also, it's super important to always name your table as well to keep them organized. I'll just call it employee data, press enter, and now let's go ahead and fill out our function for the years of experience. I'm going to type an equal sign, then I'll type VLOOKUP, the function name, then I'll type an open parentheses, and then for the first argument, the lookup value, it's going to be the exact same. So the first employee name, because that's what we're looking up inside of our entire table. Then I'll type a comma, and then for the table array, since it's a structured table, we actually don't need to absolute reference it. See, all I need to do is click on the top left box, press Ctrl Shift right arrow, down arrow, and then press Ctrl backspace, and you'll see it says employee data all. That just means it selected the entire table. And remember, whenever you name ranges, cells, or tables, it automatically references your table, range, or cell. So I'll go ahead and type a comma, and then for the column index number, in this case we wanted to output the years of experience, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth column. So I'll type a 4, and then type a comma, and then I'm going to type a false to specify an exact match for the same reason as before. Press enter, double click the fill handle, and VLOOKUP will automatically look up the years of experience for these given employee names for you. Alright, let's do a quick recap. So in the VLOOKUP function, we have 4 arguments. The first one is the lookup value. This is the value that you're looking up inside of your table. Then the second argument is the entire table that you're working with, the table array. And if you don't have a structured table, you have to remember to absolute reference your table. Then for the third argument, you have your column index number. Again, this is the number of the column in which your desired output is in. In this column, we wanted to display or output the department, so we put the number 3 because the department is the third column. In this function, we type the number 4 because the years of experience was the fourth column over here. And then for the fourth argument, we typed false to specify that we're doing an exact match because we want to look up these exact employee names. We don't want any typos. We want the exact spelling of these specific names. And again, one final reminder, if you have a structured table, for the table array, you don't need to absolute reference it because it automatically does so. Alright, so that's how to use VLOOKUP to do exact matches to look up values in your tables efficiently. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use VLOOKUP to do an approximate match in Excel. Alright, so let's say that we have the same table over here, a list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experience, and the salaries. And this one is a structured table. We've named it employee data 2. And we also have these two tables over here. We have a list of employee names, and then I've used VLOOKUP to look up their salaries, and now we want to figure out what their bonuses are based on this table over here. So essentially, to determine their bonus, all we do is take a look at their salary and see which one is it closest to. In our case, 207,000 is closest to 190,000, which is the highest one, and so we would return 15,000. Now, instead of manually doing this for every single one of your rows, you can just use VLOOKUP. Here's how. First, type equals, and then type the function VLOOKUP, then type an open parentheses, and then for the lookup value, since we'll be looking up the salaries in this table, we'll select our first salary over here, then we'll type a comma, and then for the table array, we're going to go ahead and select our entire table over here like so, and since it's not a structured one, we need to press F4 to absolute reference it. Then type another comma, and then for the column index, remember this is the number of the column in which your desired output is in. In our case, we want to output the bonuses, so the bonus is the second column in this table, so I'll write 2, type a comma, and this is where it gets different. So since we're not looking up exact numbers, right, because there's no 207,000 here, we want to type true to do an approximate match. That way it looks for the closest value and then it returns the corresponding value that you want. So then I can press enter and then double click the fill handle, and that's it. See, for these 170 I should get 13,000, so I got 13,000 here because it's the closest bonus. For 91,000 I got 7,000, which matches up over here. So let's do a quick recap of this function. So in this VLOOKUP function we have 4 arguments. First, the lookup value. We were looking up the salaries in this table, so we selected our first salary. Then we have our second argument, the table array. This is the entire table we're looking up our values in, so it would be this one over here, and we absolute referenced it because it wasn't a structured table. And then for the third argument, we specified the number of the column in which our desired output was in, right? The column index number, which is 2 because the bonus was the output we wanted. And then we typed a true, not a false, because this time we wanted to do an approximate match, since there are no exact matches from this table and this one over here. Okay, so that's how to use VLOOKUP to do approximate matches in Excel. By now, you might have heard of the function XLOOKUP. And if you don't know what it is, just think of it as the better version of VLOOKUP. And in this video, I'm going to show you 3 key differences between VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP and why you should ultimately use XLOOKUP if you and your team have access to it. First of all, I want to say that if you have access to XLOOKUP but your team doesn't have it, I would refrain from using it for now. Because when you try to share workbooks that contain the function XLOOKUP to someone that doesn't have access to that function, they're going to see a bunch of errors. So again, make sure that you and your team have access to XLOOKUP. And everyone can test it by doing this. If you type equals XLOOKUP and then you see XLOOKUP pop up, that means you have access to it. If you don't see it, that means you don't. Alright, with that being said, let's jump right into the 3 key differences between VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP. So, there are really 3 limitations that VLOOKUP has that XLOOKUP doesn't. The first one is that the search column must be on the left-hand side of the output column. So for example, let's say that we're looking up the departments of this table given a list of employee names. So that means our search column would be the employee name column, since that's where our lookup value is. And then our output column would be the department column, since that's where our desired output is in. Now, right now, VLOOKUP works perfectly fine because the employee name column is on the left-hand side of the department column. However, if we were to shift them around and move employee names on the right-hand side, then the VLOOKUP function would not work. It would give you a bunch of errors. So that's the first limitation. However, if you use XLOOKUP, it doesn't matter where the search column is. You can move it to the right, left, both will work perfectly fine. So that's the first limitation, aka big key difference. The second one is that you could only look up one column at a time. This one is huge. So if you remember from our previous example with an exact match with VLOOKUP, to look at the column for the departments and years of experiences, I had to create 2 different functions. Now, if you wanted to create one function that could be applied to both of the columns, you could do some hybrid referencing, but that can be a little bit complicated. Instead, you can simply just use equals XLOOKUP once and then apply that function to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as many columns as you want. So that's another advantage that XLOOKUP has over VLOOKUP. You can return multiple columns rather than just one. Now the final limitation, aka key difference between VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, is that VLOOKUP can only do vertical lookups. So since our table is vertically oriented where the headers are on the top instead of on the left side, we can use VLOOKUP just fine. However, if we transpose the table, flip it around so that it's horizontal, we can't use VLOOKUP. You'll get errors. Instead, you can just use XLOOKUP. So those are the three biggest differences between VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, and why you should be using XLOOKUP if you and your team have access to it instead. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use XLOOKUP to look up values in your tables efficiently. And I want to specify that there are three types of lookups that you can do with XLOOKUP. The first one is exact match, then you have approximate match, and then you also have partial match. And in this example, we'll be doing an exact match. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have a table over here with a list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experience, and their salaries. And we're in charge of doing two things. First, we need to look up the years of experience for these given employees, and then we need to look up the salaries for these given employees as well. And in this case, since we're using XLOOKUP, we can actually look up both of these columns at once. With VLOOKUP, you had to create one for each column, but with XLOOKUP, you can do multiple columns at once as long as those columns inside of the original dataset are touching. So years of experience and salary are right next to each other, so we can use it. However, if we had to look up the departments and then the salaries, well, we would have to create two XLOOKUP functions, or we could use index and match, and we'll be talking about that later on. For now, let's go ahead and look up both of these columns at once using XLOOKUP. Here's how. First, type your equal sign, then type XLOOKUP, the function name, type an open parentheses, and then for the first argument, we're going to select our lookup value. This is our first employee name over here, since this is what we'll be looking up inside of our table, then type a comma, and then for the second argument, you're going to select your lookup array. This is the column that contains your lookup value. In this case, this would be the employee name column because we're looking up Ahmed Lam, an employee name. And so you can go ahead and hover over the top of your header like this and select the column because it is a structured table. Now, if it's not a structured table, you need to absolute reference this column. Then type a comma, and then for the next argument, you can select your return array. So this is the column or the columns in which your desired output is in. In our case, we want to output the years of experience and the salary column, so we could go ahead and select both of them by hovering and then clicking and dragging above like so. And the same thing goes for this range. You need to make sure to absolute reference it if it's not a structured table. Now, go ahead and type a comma, and then for the next argument, it says if not found. This is where you can specify what you want to display in case the value is not found. So in case one of these employee names does not exist. In our case, let's just type a quote, DNE for does not exist, type a quote, then type another comma, and then for this argument, the match mode, we're going to specify that we're doing an exact match because we want to look up Ahmed Lam, not Ahmed Lams with the S or anything like that. It has to be spelled exactly the same. And so I'm going to type a 0 for exact match. Then you can type another comma, and then for the last possible argument, you can specify your search mode. So you'll only be needing this if you have duplicates in your search column. In our case, we don't have any because all the employee names are different. However, if you did have duplicates, you can specify that you want to look up from the first to last or last to first, and so on. Now, if you don't have duplicates, you can just delete this argument and close off the function after the 0 for an exact match, and then press enter. Then you can go ahead and select your values, click and drag, and there you go. That's how to use XLOOKUP to look up multiple columns at once in your table very, very quickly. Now, let's go ahead and do a quick recap. So in this function, we have 5 arguments. First, we have our lookup value. This is the value that we're looking up in our table, so that would be Ahmed Lam as our first employee name. And then for the second argument, we have our lookup array. This is the column in which that lookup value is is located in, that would be the employee name column. And then for the third argument, we have our return array. Over here, we selected the columns in which our desired outputs were in. This would be years of experience and salary columns. And then for the next argument, we specified what we wanted to display in case the employee name was not found. So we put D and E in quotes. And then finally, we typed a 0 for the match mode to specify that we're doing an exact match, because we want to look up Ahmed Lam, not Ahmed Lams with the S or anything like that. We need the spelling to be exact. So I can go ahead and press enter. And now that's how to use XLOOKUP to do an exact match to look up your values efficiently in Excel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use XLOOKUP to do an approximate match in Excel. So let's say that we're given this table over here with the list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experience, and their salaries. And we're in charge of doing one thing, and that's finding the level of each of these employees based on their years of experience, which I've already used XLOOKUP to find. So basically, here's how this would work. We would take a look at the years of experience for the employee, compare it to this table. Since it's 11, it fits in the 10 plus category, and so we would want to write the word expert here. And for this one, it says 1 for Charlie, and so that would be between 0 to 4, so we would have beginner over there, so we could copy and paste that. Now, if you have a bunch of rows, then this is going to take a long time, and that's super inefficient. So instead, here's how to use XLOOKUP to do all of these rows at once. Alright, so let's type equals XLOOKUP, and then type that open parentheses. For the first argument, the lookup value, we're going to select the years of experience because that's what we're looking up inside of our table down below. Then we're going to type a comma, and then for the second argument, we're going to select our lookup array. Again, this is the column in which your lookup value is located in. And for this example, and any approximate match you do with XLOOKUP, you can't just select this column with the ranges 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 plus, because Excel doesn't recognize those ranges. And so what you need to do is create a separate column with either the minimums or maximums of your range. So in our case, I created a separate column for the minimums, so you can see it starts with 0 here, and then 5, and then 10, and basically you can select it, and don't forget to absolute reference, so I'll press F4 to do that, and then type a comma, and then for your return array, this is the column in which your desired output is in. This would be the level, right? We want to display the level, so I'll select the level column, and then press F4 to absolute reference it, type a comma, and then again, if you want to specify the value that you want to display in case the value is not found, you can type something, or you could just simply type another comma to ignore it, and then go to the next argument, the match mode, and specify that we're doing an approximate match. Now, in Excel, the terminology for an approximate match is actually either exact match or smaller next item, or exact match or next larger item. So these are the two types of approximate matches you can do, and they both do pretty much the same thing. It just depends whether or not you have minimums or maximums. And so if you have minimums, then you're going to write the number -1. If you have maximums, right, so this would be 4 over here, and then 9, and this would be whatever your max would be, then you would write +1. So remember, if you have your minimums, do -1. Maximum, +1. So after you type your -1, you can go ahead and close off your function, press enter, and then you can double click the fill handle, and it will automatically look up your levels for you. See, over here it says 12, so that's larger than 10, and so it would be expert. For here it says beginner because it says 4, which is 0 to 4. Perfect. 5 to 9, so if we have something like 8, it would be intermediate. So with that being said, let's do a quick recap of this function. In this example, we used XLOOKUP for an approximate match, and we had 4 arguments. The first one was the lookup value, and this was our first years of experience because that's what we were looking up in this table. And then the second argument was the lookup array, and this would either be the minimums or the maximums of your ranges. In our case, we chose minimums and then absolute referenced it. And then the next argument over here is the return array, and this contains your desired output. And we wanted to output the levels, so we selected the level column, and then we skipped the if not found argument and went straight to the match mode and specified that we were using our minimums by typing in -1. Again, minimum, -1. Maximum, +1. So that's how to use XLOOKUP to do an approximate match in Excel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use XLOOKUP to do a partial match in Excel. So let's say that we have this table over here with a list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experience, and salaries. And we're in charge of finding the employee IDs given this list of last names, not full names, but only last names. Well, to do this, we could do a partial match with XLOOKUP. Here's how. First, type an equal sign, then type your function name XLOOKUP, type in open parentheses, and then for the first argument, we're going to select our lookup lookup value. Now, usually we would just select the first value we're looking up inside of our table, but this is just the last name. We don't have the full employee name, so this wouldn't work. In this case, we would need to use a wildcard because we're dealing with a value that ends in something. So let's take a look at what that would look like. If we wanted to look up the employee name where Banks was the last name, then that means that the value in the cell has to end in Banks. To write this out, we would type a quote, an asterisk, a quote, to specify our wildcard, and then we want to say it ends in Banks. So we're going to attach this cell reference Banks over here by typing an ampersand, remember, because that's the traditional way of combining values, and then we can select the cell reference Banks over here. So this basically says the value ends in Banks. Alright, value ends in Banks. Now, if we wanted to say that the value begins with Banks, then we would move the wildcard, aka asterisk. So it would actually be behind our cell reference Banks. So it would be H4, which is Banks, and then we would type an ampersand, quote, asterisk, quote, just like that. So that's how to say the value begins with the word Banks. Now, if we want to specify that as long as the cell contains the word Banks in the middle, then we can go ahead, write quote, asterisk, quote, ampersand. And then they're connected by the ampersand, which means that as long as the value contains the word Banks inside, then that's what we're looking up. But again, in our case, we just want to have the first half because we want to specify that it is a last name, so it has to end in Banks. So after that, we can type a comma, and then for the second argument, we're going to select our lookup array. And this would be the column that contains our last names, which would be the employee name column. So I'll click over here, and then type a comma, and then for the next argument, we're going to select our return array. This is the column that contains our desired output. In our case, we want to display or output the employee IDs, so I could select that column, type a comma, and remember, this is a structured table, so that's why I'm not absolute referencing these columns. It automatically does so for me. Then for the next argument, if not found, let's just skip it, type a comma, and then to specify that you're doing a partial match, you're going to need to type 2 because you used a wildcard for the partial match. Then you could close it off like this, press enter, and then double click the fill handle, and that's it. Once you do that, XLOOKUP will automatically look up the employee IDs based on these given last names. Now, let's do a quick recap of this function. In this function, we have 4 arguments. The first one is the lookup value, and since we did a partial one, we included the asterisk over here as a wildcard to specify that the value in this column has to end in the word Banks or Fields Power, whatever the last name is here. And then for the second argument, we selected the column that contained this lookup value. So that was the employee name column. And then for the third argument, we selected our return array. Again, we wanted to output the employee ID, so we selected that column. And then we skipped the if not found argument and went straight to the match mode, which we wrote 2 because we were doing a partial match, which requires a wildcard. So that's how to use XLOOKUP to do partial matches in Excel. If you don't have access to XLOOKUP and you want to do a lookup on a horizontally oriented table like this one, you can just use HLOOKUP. Here's how. So let's say we have a table over here with a list of employee names, IDs, departments, years of experience, and the salaries. And we're in charge of looking up the salaries for these given employee names. Well, to do this, we can just type an equal sign, then type the function HLOOKUP, type an open parentheses, and then for the first argument, we're going to select our lookup value. This would be our first employee name because that's what we're looking up inside of this table. Then we'll type a comma, and then for the next argument, we're just going to select our entire table. So we can select the top left cell, press Ctrl Shift right arrow, down arrow, and then make sure to absolute reference it by pressing the shortcut F4. Then we'll type another comma, and then for the third argument, we're going to specify our row index number. So this is just the number of the row in which your desired output is in. In our case, it's on the bottom. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th row, so we would type 5, and then type another comma, and since we're doing an exact match, right, we want to look up Ahmed Lam, not Ahmed Lams with the S. The spelling has to be exact, so I'll type false, and then I can close it off and press enter. Then double click the fill handle, and that's it. So let's do a quick recap with HLOOKUP. With HLOOKUP, we had the 4 arguments. We had our first argument, which was the lookup value, so our first employee name, because that's what we were looking up in this table. Then for the second argument, we selected our table array. This is just the entire table you're working with, and make sure to absolute reference that if it's not a structured table. And then for the third argument, we have the row index number. This is just the number of the row in which your desired output is in. We wanted to output the salaries, so that's the fifth row over here, which is why we typed 5. And finally, we typed false for an exact match because we wanted to look up these values with the exact same spelling, so we had to type false for an exact match. So that's how to use HLOOKUP to look up values in your horizontally oriented tables efficiently.
Alright, now you've got the must-know Excel formulas and functions under your belt. With that being said, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you found it useful. And if you want to keep leveling up your Excel skills, make sure to follow me on Instagram at excel.withgrant. I post quick Excel tips there every day to help you work smarter, not harder. And don't forget to grab my free Excel shortcuts cheat sheet if you haven't already. It's linked below and it'll help you save a ton of time and boost your productivity at work. Alright, with that being said, thanks for watching and that's it.